Hello, Not Manly here. Welcome back to episode 28 of Kerbal Space Program, where we are going interplanetary. We have 3 transfer windows, one on top of each other, starting with Duna. And we're going to be sending out our first Duna probe that was sent up with a prototype single-stage to orbit craft. This tiny little probe only has about 2.8 kilometers per second, but it has an amazing thrust-to-weight ratio, and it is enough to get out to Duna on the first ejection burn. We are using Trigger AU's transfer window planner to get this set up, and I found out that Kerbal Alarm Clock and transfer window planner don't necessarily agree with each other as to when the best times to eject are. So I end up getting a little late on my ejection out to Duna. And I just get a rough encounter here because I know I'm going to need some corrections later on. But here we are, getting out to our tiny little atmospheric probe here with the atmosphere fluid spectrometer aboard. There it goes. An amazing thrust to weight. It only takes 2 minutes to eject this craft out from low Eve orbit. In addition to the probes we've already sent out to bin, we're going to be sending out to nearly all the major bodies in the Kerbal Space Program system. We're going to try to. It's going to be the only way we can get any science aside from maybe scraping it out of those research labs. Here's our correction on the way to Duna, out at the ascending node. That way we can get a plane change lined up out there. I got the plane change set up further closer to apoapsis so that we're moving a little slower and hopefully costing a little less in delta V. And I'm attempting here to get a rendezvous with Ike. If I can get an Ike encounter, I can let Ike give a mild gravity assist. If I can pass in front of Ike, I can slow down a little bit without expending too much more delta V. I'm going to use a combination of an Ike encounter and an aero capture at Duna to try to capture in because we have very little delta V left on this tiny probe. The rule seems to be you pass in front of a moon to slow down and behind a moon to speed up. And I'm adjusting my encounter. If I use radial in and out, I can adjust my position, and if I use prograde retrograde, I can adjust my timing so I can match my arrival to where where I want Ike to be, excuse me. I'm getting as close to Ike as I can, and then as close to Duna's surface as I can to do the aero capture. But even with that insertion is going to cost about 850 meters per second, and that's delta V I don't have. I'm going to have to retry that insertion repeatedly until I can get it. Fortunately, Duna's atmosphere is pretty thin, and this craft is pretty light, so we do stand a chance of capturing without expending any delta V. We'll have to see when we get out there. It's going to be several days before we can get out there. In the meantime, we've got our second Duna probe sent up with the Razor Force 7. This is a much heavier craft, using the same engine as the first, and as a result, its thrust to weight is, well, it's just abysmal. We're going to do this ejection in multiple passes. I'm going to do a kilometer per second delta V out on this pass, and then I'm going to do a second ejection burn that'll get us a little closer. And there we are, the end of the first burn is coming up. I end up doing the second ejection later. Here's something I found though. I tried doing an ejection here that got me a good Duna encounter, but I saw that apoapsis was much further out. And I'm like, why am I expending all this delta V? So I reduce my prograde ejection, and I end up with an ejection that's only 670 meters per second. Sure, I'll have to do a correction later on, but that was expected. That was a significant delta V savings, not to mention that the ejection was actually not at periapsis. I have no idea how that worked, but it worked. The boys at the research lab figured that it was going to work. This is a little different here. I'm still passing below Ike, but I'm going to be doing polar capture to try to get that light blue orbit there for this craft. We'll see if we can achieve this. Now when we get out to Duna, we're going to lose signal, so we're going to have to make sure we send up relay probes in the meantime while these craft are on their way. There we go, Duna Probe 2. Also, we got Moho's transfer window right on top of us. Look at that, and if we hurry, we can get a craft out there without expending a ridiculous amount of Delta V. We got a lot to do, and as it is, we need a total of 4.7 kilometers per second and more if we want to capture at Moho. Moho moves very, very, very quickly, and it is at a ridiculous incline compared to Eve. So we need a lot of Delta V, but because Eve is so heavy and low Eve orbit is so fast, we need half-decent thrust to weight as well. This Poodle engine is not going to cut it on its own. We don't have the Twitch engines, we do have the Spark engines though, and what we can do is we can attach some cubic octagonal struts to the bottom of this tank. We can attach some Spark engines to the cubic octagonal struts. There we are. We'll rotate the struts, we'll put them underneath that tank, just like that. You couldn't do this in earlier versions of Kerbal Space Program, by the way. You can do it now, though, because struts have fuel crossfeed, but you could turn on a strict mode if you wanted to. But hey, that looks like we got 4 little engines attached to the big one. Hey, why not? We end up with, well, right now we don't have the engines on the same stage, but when we put them there, we get an extra 20% odd boost in thrust to weight. We'll take that. We'll put an extra little fuel tank on there, but this craft is 26 tons. Getting it up here was a challenge. And this ended up being one of the better launch profiles here, where I got at least a little bit close. There we go. Oh yeah, 4.7 kilometers per second, but I ended up expending way too much of that just to get to low Eve orbit, and we're left with 4 kilometers per second. That means our visit to Moho is going to be a flyby only. Again, we're using Transfer Window Planner to get the ejection vector out there, and there we go. I end up getting a pretty lucky encounter. Transfer Window Planner can help you find those points where the inclination matches just right. Even if you don't get path left circle. Then I found out my ejection was a little too low. Oops. Ended up trying this again, and I started the ejection later. And that worked out better. We only just hit the edge of the atmosphere. We didn't dip below 55 kilometers this time. But hey, Transfer Window Planner can help us get those ejections where the inclination matches, or at least comes very, very, very close. And I end up doing my correction while we're still within Eve's sphere of influence. It didn't cost too much Delta V either, a mere 70 meters per second. We're gonna have to pass in front of Moho so that we can get that low altitude science. We'll be doing some corrections later. Here we go, there we go, we got our Moho encounter. We have a okay Moho periapsis, but just as I figured, our orbital insertion is going to be ridiculous. Look at that, 1.3, 1.7, 2.5 kilometers per second, and it's still not enough. It's going to have to be a flyby only. If we're going to go interplanetary, well, we have to go nuclear. Thanks to the Gilly base, we managed to earn enough science to research the LVN nuclear engine, which uses liquid fuel only. Now, in the vehicle assembly building, we have put together our first nuclear probe. We don't have the structural parts to do a triple couple yet, but what we got there is we have a pair of I-beams from the top of the craft coming down, and we have those liquid fuel only tanks attached to the I-beam, and then the engine's attached to that. Now that's a pretty weak attachment, so we ended up using auto strut as many places as we can, and we added some real struts as well to make sure this craft did not come apart on ascent. I've assembled contraptions like this before, and I've had a wobbly craft. This time, not so wobbly. This ended up being the best ascent profile for this craft, to get as much horizontal speed as I could out of the chemical rockets before switching to the nuclear rockets. And even that wasn't enough. We just get 5 kilometers per second, but again I end up consuming much of that just to close low Eve orbit. Fortunately, we're high enough in the atmosphere that those nuclear engines are at full efficiency. There we go. Specific impulse, 800 seconds. We do end up closing orbit with a little more than 4 kilometers per second. This is actually the second of 2 probes we're sending out to Jool. The first one did not have large enough solar panels, so I ended up sending up the second one with larger ones. But we'll see, we'll get the other probe out there anyway. I ended up spreading this ejection over 2 burns just like last time. I consumed about 1 kilometer per second here. Actually, it was more like 2 minutes, there we go. And then I did the rest of the ejection on the next pass. And this time we were high enough to not come anywhere near the atmosphere. Again, I stopped myself short using a matte lounge trick so that my correction actually burns towards Jool and not away from it. So we're still saving a bit of delta V. And speaking of matte lounge tricks, I'm about to show you an essential skill for visiting Jool. First, we get our closest approach pretty close. Oh, by the way, the Winnipeg Jets won 4-2. Congratulations, Winnipeg, on winning that good hockey game. And there we go. We get our ascending node matching up with our closest approach to get our Jool encounter. And from there, we move Jool periapsis inward, 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 until we can get a Tylo encounter. Tylo is the 3rd and heaviest moon of Jool, and in its orbit it is moving so fast that we can use it for a gravity assist to capture at Jool without hardly expending any delta V. Again, the rule seems to be pass in front of a moon to slow down, pass behind the moon to speed up, and if Tylo isn't in the right position, you can always use prograde retrograde to adjust your timing, and then normal and anti-normal to adjust your position. And you want to rendezvous with Tylo roughly at Jool periapsis to get the most benefit of that gravity assist. Look at that. When we hit the Jool system, we're not even going to expend any delta V to capture, and we're out at the orbit of Paul. Look at that, not too far. We're just going to fix our inclination a little bit. There we go. And then in roughly 2.5 Eve years, we will be visiting Jool. But we got 10 days before we can do this course correction anyway. We've got lots to do in the meantime. We'll catch up with these probes in a future episode. Until then, I'm not Manly. Fly safe.